16-year-old boy in Hidalgo County, Texas, in good health. His father, Ernesto Ramirez, is a single father whose life's mission is to ensure the health, the safety, the well-being of his son, Junior. His son is his best friend and all that he lives for. So when the Wuhan flu swept out of those laboratories in China and onto our beaches, onto our lands, infecting our people, Ernesto Ramirez, like any father, became concerned, and his first thought was for the safety and well-being of his son. But thankfully, the officials of Hidalgo County, the Hidalgo County officials were ready. They were prepared, and they had an answer in place that would ensure the safety of Ernesto and Junior Ramirez. And that message was, get vaccinated. And it wasn't just a message, it was a campaign. They did regular public announcements. They even dedicated a permanent website to that effort to get vaccinated. And the message was not just that the vaccine would make you safe. It was more than that. It was that getting vaccinated was responsible. It was the right thing to do. And there was even an insinuation that if you did not get vaccinated, that you were a bad person. Ernesto Ramirez is a man who loves his country and would never believe that his government would mislead him. So he heeded their advice. He took their advice. He heeded their cautions, and he had his son vaccinated. Junior Ramirez took the Pfizer vaccine. And the day following taking that Pfizer vaccine, Junior Ramirez was playing on a playground with the other boys, and he fell over. He was rushed to the hospital. Ernesto chased behind the ambulance, following it to the hospital. And when Ernesto arrived at the hospital, the medical professionals, they told him there was not much they could do for Junior Ramirez. Shortly thereafter, Junior Ramirez was declared dead. Ernesto pressed the medical professionals. How could this happen? A young boy in good health dying like this suddenly. How can this happen? The medical professionals were abrupt. They were not forthcoming with information. And this caused Ernesto to be suspicious. So he insisted on a special autopsy to be performed, a specialty autopsy. Weeks later, those results came back, and the story was not good. The story that the autopsy told was that Junior Ramirez, a 16-year-old boy in good health, who the day before took a Pfizer vaccination, that his heart had ballooned up to twice its normal size, and it was surrounded by contaminants of the Pfizer vaccine. Prior to this wave of COVID vaccines hitting our people, prior to this trend of vaccinating with the COVID vaccine, child heart ailments like this were not happening. They were unheard of. Heart attacks and heart ailments of this sort were reserved for the elderly. They were reserved for our grandmas and grandpas, but never for children. But now in this new COVID vaccinated world, these type of heart attacks in children is common. But you see, that's way off in Hidalgo County. And thankfully, we're here in the Houston area. We're far away from that. We're in Harris and in Fort Bend counties. And we can rest assured that that sort of message, that sort of dangerous misinformation would not be communicated to our people here locally. Because, for example, in Fort Bend County, where I'm a resident, we've taken extra precautions. And what we've done is we've employed a chief physician for Fort Bend County, a chief medical officer, a chief doctor for Fort Bend County. And her name is Dr. Jacqueline Minter. And Dr. Jacqueline Minter is employed by the county. We pay her salary so we can rest assured that she will not be corrupted by the pharmaceuticals message. But you see, those assumptions are wrong, because Dr. Jacqueline Minter of Fort Bend County, just like the Hidalgo County officials, had the same message: get vaccinated. Get vaccinated and you'll be safe. But she didn't just say you'll be safe. She said all people will be safe. The elderly, minorities, children, everyone would be safe. And she, just like the Hidalgo County government officials, she also created a campaign out of it where she did regular interviews, and she opened every commissioner's court with this message. And what happened is that the Fort Bend County officials, they rallied around her, and they created a campaign, an initiative in Fort Bend County to get the residents of Fort Bend County vaccinated. And what they did regular press releases, and they had vaccine stations at the schools and at different places around the county. And they did web videos on the subject, and they even had a mobile unit that would drive to your neighborhood to get you vaccinated. And this resulted in Fort Bend County becoming the highest per capita vaccinated county in the state of Texas. There is a database. It is called the VAERS database. That stands for Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, the VAERS database. And that is a database, a public database, where you can report if you or someone in your family has been injured by the vaccines. Or you could report if you've lost a loved one to the vaccines. And as of today, the VAERS database reports 1.6 million vaccine injuries due to the COVID vaccines. When the Fort Bend County officials launched this campaign to vaccinate the people of Fort Bend, they were confronted by the residents of Fort Bend County. The residents confronted them in a commissioner's court where all Fort Bend counties were present, including Dr. Jacqueline Minter. And we confronted them with the statistics of the VAERS database. It is not our job to confront them with this information. It is their job to know it. They are public officials, and this is a public database. But regardless, they were confronted. And the county citizens begged and pleaded the county officials to slow down with their aggressive nature in promoting this vaccine, to take a second consideration. All of those messages were dismissed. And the county officials doubled down on their initiative to vaccinate the people of Fort Bend County. If a person gives to you something that they call a medicine, and it is actually a poison, and you take that supposed medicine that is a poison, and you consume it, and then you die, is that murder? Was what happened to Junior Ramirez in Hidalgo County murder? He was told that that was a medicine, that it would make him safe, and it appears to have led to his death. Did the Hidalgo County officials contribute to this death with their reckless campaign? The Fort Bend County officials, in all of their publications promoting the vaccine drive, all of their publications, all of their public statements, we cannot find one mention of the VAERS database or the vaccine injuries. We cannot find it. So if there was a person that was injured, maimed, harmed, or even killed in Fort Bend County, did Fort Bend County officials contribute to that? They call it a vaccine drive, but is the more appropriate term a poison drive? Did Fort Bend County officials poison their constituents? This is the question of our times. These are very difficult times and hard questions, but you see, we are not the first people to be confronted with a government that's gone rogue and done this sort of sick medical experimentation on their people. You see, we had the Tuskegee experiments, sick and gruesome experiments done by zealous government officials on a portion of our people. And then after that, we had what happened in the Nazi medical experiments, sick and gruesome things done to the people of Germany. And as a result of these occurrences, which seems to be a regular thing with governments, the Nuremberg Code was established. The Nuremberg Code came out of the Nuremberg trials in Germany, where Nazi medical doctors were tried for the experimentations they did on the people of Germany. And the result of that was a couple of very common sense rules going forward. Number one, if you were part of a medical experimentation, you need to know that you're part of a medical experimentation. Number two, you need to know all of the risks involved in any type of medical procedure that you're receiving. Was this done? Clearly, it was not. And so we need to ask the question, does the Nuremberg Code apply to people that pushed this thing on the people of America, on the people of Texas? This is the question of our day. This is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we're gonna give you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your government, to restore your government to its rightful purpose, which is nothing more than running the roads, running the infrastructure, operating the courts, and operating the emergency services, and not much more than that. We will give you the information, and then the ball's in your court to do something with it. This is the Chris Heasley Show. And with that being said, I'm going to introduce our guest today, Jennifer Bridges. Jennifer was confronted with the same sort of bullying where she was coerced into taking the vaccine. But she would not, you have to bully a bully, and Jennifer knows that. So she stood up to the establishment, and she said no, she fought back. And now she has become a champion of freedom with regard to your health-making decisions. So my question for Jennifer, did I get it right? Did I get it right? Were we misled with this vaccine information?
Thank you for having me, Chris. And you are 100% right on that. We were by far misled as much as you can possibly mislead people. The fact, and I tell people all the time, just the fact that they showed and tried to say that it was 100% safe and effective from the get-go, and they never weighed across from that at all. That's completely impossible. In the medical field, you cannot be 100% safe and effective on anything, any procedure, medication. It's not humanly possible. Like now they're trying to say like they're God and they can just make this perfect thing, but you can't. Even Tylenol, if you take too much of it, can kill you. It can put you into liver failure. And the fact that this is, you have to stop and think without even, I've been a registered nurse now for 12 years. Even outside of a medical background, just the common sense, this was rushed. This quote unquote vaccine was rushed. It was manufactured so quickly, did not have the prior testing, the proper type of research that it needed, and then they just threw it out en masse to the public. Like they made us the guinea pigs. They made children, adults, every walks of life the guinea pig. They said, hey, we have limited research, but a lot of the research they had was bad. It was harming. It was killing animals. It was doing horrible things, and they knew this too. They hid the records, and they're starting to come out. Pfizer's records are being released now, and they knew this was going to cause heart issues. They knew the blood clotting. They knew all these things that we're seeing, but they hid it all, and all they said was, take it. It's 100% safe and effective. You'll protect your grandma, your neighbor, everybody. But that's not how a proper vaccine is. You've always taken a vaccine to protect yourself. You have never in the history of human beings took a vaccine to protect somebody else. That's not what it's entailed for. That's not the way it works.
So this is the Chris Heasley Show, and if you want to call in, our number is 713-974-4000, 713-974-4000. Jennifer, can you tell me, when you were initially confronted with this demand for you to get vaccinated, what caused you to have second thoughts, and what were your concerns at the time?
Oh, at the very beginning, it was very basic. I was working at Houston Methodist Hospital, which is one of the largest hospital systems in the Houston area. And basically it was, when was it? It was December of 2020, if I remember right, when they initially gave us the vaccines, the shots. And we were one of the first hospital systems to even get it. They were starting to give it only to the select few, and then it came down. They gave it to, started giving it to employees if they wanted it and this and that, but it was too soon. It was not FDA approved. It was still in an EUA status, which is experimental, and they were just giving it out like it was the right thing to do. So then we started noticing right off the bat, people coming into the hospital. And remember, before this, me, along with thousands of others, we worked the COVID unit for a year and a half without this magical shot in our body. We all caught it. I caught it from my patient, survived, fine. Yeah, I felt sick, but I was good. So now you're telling me I have to have this. And right off the bat, we were having patients come in, and it made no medical sense. Never in history would we see a 20, 30-year-old healthy, fit, active person come in, and now a week after taking the shot, they have blood clots in both legs, multiple blood clots in their lungs, PEs, pulmonary embolisms. That doesn't happen. We were seeing people come in just like severe paralysis. You couldn't even just assume. It was literally data. We would look in their records, see that they had just taken one of the shots, and usually 9 times out of 10 it was the Pfizer shot because that's the one they were promoting. And within like a couple days to a week, maybe 2 weeks top, it would be sudden paralysis, sudden uncontrollable tremors. I mean, the list goes on forever, not just covered in blood clots, but then like miscarriages, stillbirths, strokes, heart attacks. I mean, it was astronomical. So we were all kind of like noticing this because we were the first ones to really deal with this in the whole country. And we're kind of talking to each other, even doctors are coming over whispering. They're like, this doesn't make sense. We've never seen this before. And everybody said the same thing. Even our doctors would come over. This has to be from the shot. This has to be. There's nothing else. But there was nowhere in the system at Houston Methodist to report such a thing, to talk about it, to document it. And everybody was whispering. Everybody was scared because Houston Methodist, they were like Nazis. They're like, you have to take this. Everybody, needs to take this. But they hadn't forced it upon us yet. Right? So we knew it was coming, and people were getting scared. Like, everybody assumed the way anything's ever worked, you wait till it's FDA approved, you wait till the research is out, and then mandated. Everybody mandated the flu vaccine, but that's how it would typically work. But everybody was getting very scared, very anxious. Like, I'd see nurses in the hallway crying. Some had to take anxiety medicine because they were nervous, like, what's going to happen? Like, we know this is coming. And then basically, after just seeing patient after patient, at least half the staff, and you're talking, I forget, it's like 27,000 people or more of a total staff, at least half was like, did not take it. Only maybe 40% of the staff took it on their own regard, right? Just because they wanted to, they thought they were supposed to. Everybody else was like, nope, they were waiting. And then it was, and we can get, if you have any questions or whatnot, we can get onto all the mandate topic after that.
So, okay, so the medical professionals are seeing this incredible amount of people injured, these anomalies that you've never seen before, and at the same time, you have the establishment, your employer, coming down on you saying, you're next. I would just imagine that is a pressure cooker that's going to pop. I mean, how did everyone in that intense situation, how did they deal with that?
Well, it was very interesting how different people dealt with it. So most nurses, most people in the medical field don't like to rock the boat. They just kind of do what they're told and they keep going, kind of heads down. There's a few select of us, though. There's a little minority of us that we're patient advocates, right? We're strong-willed. We do what's right. We stand up to the doctor. We don't just take orders and go, because doctors make mistakes all the time. So do hospitals. If you just blindly listen to things, people would be dropping and getting injured like left and right. So basically, like, we were getting little emails, right, saying, oh, right now it's voluntary, but we will mandate it. We just don't know when. But they knew when. They just didn't want to tell us yet. Then it came out, oh, hey, here's a $500 hope bonus. If you take the shot, and, both shots by this certain date, which I believe it was either March or April of 2021. And if you took it by then, guess what? You get $500. Which is like, I'm sorry, but I'm not risking my life for $500. But a lot of people I talked to, a good chunk, jumped on board because they had that mentality like, oh, well, they're going to mandate it anyways, might as well make some money off of it. So a good chunk jumped on board. And then there was at least 40% of us left in the whole, hospital system that was like, no, we don't want this. So then, basically, they ended up mandating it in the middle of April. But prior to that, just like a week or two before, a bunch of us were talking, and we were just like, it's coming. We need to be proactive. Let's nip this in the bud so we don't have to go through this and get forced into something we're not okay with. And I was always kind of the more outspoken one, so I kind of got pushed. And I went around. I did like a little poll myself within the hospital to see who agreed with us. And what was sad is a lot of people did. At least half of the staff did, but they were terrified to be seen agreeing with us that we shouldn't be forced. So they would, as I was doing this little poll myself, they were hiding me in closets, hiding me in stairwells, like sneaking in to sign it, because they were scared of Methodist. Well, then basically the CEO, CNO found out, literally physically tried to find me to stop me from doing this. Like, that's my free right. I'm allowed to talk to people and communicate. They were trying to stop me, but they couldn't find me. Every time I would go on to another department, they would miss me. So I got out that day. They never found me. But sure enough, the very next day, I get called into a meeting with my CEO and CNO. And long story short, I won't ramble on, but I brought another nurse with me as a witness, and they just spent an hour and a half trying to bully, intimidate me, shut me up, and literally my CEO at the time, David Bernard, literally looked at me and was like, this 100% vaccination is more important than your own individual autonomy. If you don't like it, there's the door. Don't you think a new baby nurse would love to come in and take your spot? He even looked at me and, got all cocky and was like, so what made you think you could actually do something about this? Like, stand up to these big, powerful, rich people? So I got mad and we started arguing. I said, we should have a right. We've been doing this for a year and a half. Like, how can you just force us into something and make us inject something into our body that we don't even know anything about? We know very short-term effects, which are not looking good right now, but nobody knew that anything long-term effects because no one had it in their body more than just a couple months. So you can't force somebody, and there was no arguing, there was no nothing. It was just basically, nope, that this is it, take it or leave it.
So think about that CEO. Okay, you've seen up front these people come in with these anomalies, these ailments, and you want none of that, right? And here is this guy forcing you to walk off the plank and take the vaccine. This is very interesting because when in Fort Bend, they attempted to put those masks by mandate on the kids, and every Fort Bend parent knew that the next step was forcing a vaccine on the children. We all knew that. Taking the autonomy of the child away from the parent, ripping that away from the parent's hands, and giving it to the medical professionals or the school board or whoever. And so what happened is when citizens confronted the Fort Bend ISD, the Fort Bend School Board, which, by the way, it has almost entirely been replaced. They've almost all been voted out except for 2 people that I know of. When we confronted this previous school board, what did they do to counter us? They called on the CEOs of the hospitals. They called on the CEOs of the hospital to double down on their attempt to mandate the masks on the kids. And you just heard the type of character that these CEOs are. There's a profit motive there. Weren't they being paid? I'm going to say something. If I got this right or wrong, were they paid $32,000 for dead COVID patients?
Oh, it would be more than that. And basically, remember, these CEOs, especially because you have a CEO of each hospital, then you have like Mark Boom, who's the head CEO of all of them. They are making astronomical figures off of all this. And I want to remind everybody, we were the first ones in the entire country to get this vaccine, this COVID vaccine mandate. So we were the initial guinea pigs. And then after, we were terminated and everything, and then the whole rest of the country waited a few months and then jumped on board, right? But let me tell you something. I know for a fact, 100% fact, because somebody is verifying this information. So guess who was here several months prior to them rolling out these mandates and these initiatives? Who was here in Houston meeting with the CEO of Methodist, the lawyers, some other people as well? Can you take any guess who might be here to help push this agenda?
Oh, goodness gracious. The Fauci.
He was here directly in Houston to push this initiative, right? And then, of course, it's Pfizer. It's all Pfizer. Well, the amount of money that they've been making off the government, and I'm sure Pfizer too, we're waiting to get those documents, because I have people that are still in there that have told me they have literally been at times collecting illegal data on the patients that they don't even know about, running blood tests that they don't even know about, and then they just disappear out of the computer system. So why would you be doing that unless you're collecting data, right? What kind of setup contract did they initiate with Pfizer, with Fauci, with all them, since we were the first ones to collect data? And you're very right about the government too, because I have coders. I have a huge federal lawsuit with about 113 people on it, right? And we're going after them for what they did. I have coders that have been fired that can testify that yes, the amount of money, just 30,000 is like the low ball, because they got paid for the positive testing. They got paid for putting them on ventilators, even if it was a couple minutes. If they died in the hospital of COVID, they got paid astronomical numbers. And these coders were even being told, like, say I died because I had a broken arm and I bled to death, right? But you just happened to swab me and I had COVID. Well, you legitimately died from the broken arm, so that's what the coders have to put, because that's what's morally, ethically, that's what happened. Well, people in Methodist were like, well, hey, they had COVID, so put COVID-related death. And they're like, no, that's not why they died. It had nothing to do with COVID complications. And they would be pushed to do that because they made so much more money. And one last thing I want to touch on that. Anything I say, I have proof on, right? So I've seen the financials and talked to upper people in Methodist before this whole COVID initiative. They were literally in the negative. They were not doing well as an organization. After COVID, with all the people in the hospital getting paid, initiating the shots, the mandates, they are millions and millions, maybe even billions now ahead of the ballgame in the positive. So to go from that extreme, can you even imagine what happened behind closed doors?
So essentially what you're saying is that the American public were the guinea pigs of the corporate America in concert with your local governments. And so here is the theory that I've heard, that essentially, if you manage a grocery store, if you manage a convenience store, if you manage any sort of business, you always crunch the numbers and maximize profitability. And so the question is, were they crunching the numbers? Obviously, we know that they were. They were crunching the numbers. They were not, and they were crunching the numbers knowing that payout happened when people died of the COVID flu. And so this is the theory. What would happen is you'd come in, they'd give you a faulty test, they'd run it enough times to show that you have COVID. Once they have COVID, they bring you in. While you're in, they'd say, hey, listen, can we intubate you? You probably don't. You might come in with a stubbed toe. They say, can we intubate you? You probably won't need it, but just go ahead and sign yes, just in case. So you say, okay, yeah, you can intubate it because you trust your medical professionals. So then what happens, you come in and then they test you for COVID, and then all of a sudden, what they do is they get you on remdesivir, which does kidney failure. They intubate you, which has an incredible percentage of death rate. They let your family leave, and the next morning your family shows up and they say, oh my goodness, we lost him. I heard that theory. I am not the medical professional. Am I in the ballpark?
You are so in the ballpark, but it got even sicker than that, because I worked the COVID unit back and forth for like a year and a half maybe. And it was even worse than that. Families were not allowed in. Your loved one could be dying in that bed. You may be like on hospice a few days left. You are not allowed in. I was actually the first nurse at the Baytown Methodist that was asked to do these window visits. So finally, after families complained enough, because if you know your mom, dad, sister, brother, somebody is dying, you want to see them before they go and pay your last respects. They wouldn't let them at all. Even they would get lawyers. They would block them. So these window visits, I did the very first one. So what they would do is they would move these patients over into our unit in 2 West, where some of the rooms had windows that went to the outdoor pavilion. Then they would have the family member in there. They would bring this whole group of family to the window. These poor family members had to look at their loved one dying through the window. And then I would have to do the whole ET setup, head to toe, gowning, everything, and be in there with them sometimes over an hour, which was fine. And I would hold the phone to their ear so the loved ones through the windows could talk to them and say their goodbyes. And they had no idea the care that was going on. Sometimes, people would have trouble with their oxygenation. They'd be on masks. They'd be on different things. Well, we were literally told by management, don't feed them. Basically, if they eat, it's either eat or breathe. You don't feed them. Sometimes you'd see patients with no fluids, no IV fluids, nothing, no oral IV, nothing for days and days. And you're like, wait a minute, this person needs hydration. And then finally they'd get something on board. But the problem was, and I would be in there with a patient sometimes who had a mask on getting high flow oxygen, but I would help them. I would remove the mask, give them a bite of food, let them chew, swallow it, put the mask back on. They were fine. But they didn't want us to do any of that. And it was just sick. And the problem too is, if you could have just treated this stuff ahead of time the right way, or allowed them to get the proper help at the early stages, a lot of this would have never escalated to where it needed to be. But at the beginnings of COVID, when it first came out, when they said our hospital was overrun, right, we were literally bored. We were getting sent home because they weren't allowing people to come in unless you were in trouble. You could barely breathe. Your oxygen was in the 70s, which it should be 90 to 100. It was nobody was coming in. So it was completely opposite of the normal medical industry where it's hey, let's treat you early on, or prophylactic or something to keep you from getting bad. But now it's let's wait till you get bad, come in, and then we're going to do all this stuff. And you have zero family or patient advocate to help you when you don't know what's going on.
Right, because the people I know that survived said that their family member insisted on being near their side. This is the Chris Heasley Show. If you have a question or a story that you'd like to share on vaccine injuries, call 713-974-4000. I want to ask you about women with miscarriages. Did you see women, after taking this vaccine, did you see an increase in miscarriages?
Well, the unit I worked in was medical surgical, so I didn't deal with the miscarriages. But my friends that are nurses that worked in labor and delivery, yes. It was so sad. They were literally, I got out there, everybody started coming to me with their stories because they knew they could trust me. These nurses were seeing astronomical amounts of miscarriages, of stillbirths, never in the history of they've seen before. It was just such an uptake of it happening, but they said it was different than they had ever seen. I don't want to be too detailed or gruesome for people, but picture a normal miscarriages. But they said these ones were different. These babies were covered in blood clots. There was such profuse bleeding that they couldn't even stop it. We have never, my one friend who's a nurse was in 20 years of being in labor and delivery, I've never seen anything like this. And they would look back in the record and it was always, sure enough, this pregnant woman who was misled by somebody, hey, a week or so ago took the Pfizer shot, Moderna, whatnot, and now all of a sudden this is happening. Even I had a coworker, and I'll never forget this. I won't use her name, but she was a nurse. You know, the mandates were happening, and then her OBGYN told her it was safe. She was pregnant. She took the shot, listening like she thought she was supposed to. Within just a couple weeks' time, she had a really bad miscarriage up in our department. And we were talking about it later on, and she had no idea. And I looked at her and I said, sweetheart, that shot killed your baby. I said, and I told her all the information and what I had seen and what I knew, and her face just got white. She looked at me and she's like, oh my God, Jen, I killed my baby. And it hit her, like she realized. And I said, no, you didn't. I said, you didn't know. I said, but your doctor, your work, your managers, everybody lied to you because there was no testing on pregnant women. I mean, how can they tell you this brand new experimental drug is okay for you and your fetus while you're pregnant? That's literally the definition of insanity. That's crazy.
I think it's very important that people that were put in that pressure cooker of a situation and made the wrong decision, that they forgive themselves. Because we've never been in territory like this before, and there was an agenda, and they found themselves squarely in the crosshairs of that agenda. It's an angle that's never been placed on us before. And so I think it's really important that they place blame appropriately on those that created and implemented the agenda, the corporations, the medical professionals, the government officials that were all compliant in this scheme. But so the babies, right? So as you described it, very gruesome, even with your more tampered down description, it can only be assumed that they died a very painful death.
I can't even imagine. Gosh, I'm sure they did. And the things, I don't want to be any more descriptive, but the things the nurses told me, these nurses were crying over the things they saw and had to do to control these bleeding situations because they had never experienced it before. So I can't even imagine. And then what's sad is, there has been a lot of babies that have made it, but now they're starting to see that these babies are having different issues with them as well. So it's going to last for years and years and years because we're just now getting into, okay, it's been 2 years now, maybe almost 3. So as time goes by, we're only going to see more and more and more, but it's going to be harder to prove that that's what caused it. But sure enough, you're going to look back in the records and it's going to line up perfectly.
What about the story of Junior Ramirez, 16-year-old boy, Hidalgo County, Texas, takes the Pfizer vaccine, the next day falls over dead. The autopsy reports come back and show that his heart is enlarged to twice its normal size and that it's surrounded by contaminants from the vaccine. What about that story? Did you see child deaths, child heart attacks, that sort of thing? Did you see that come across your way?
Well, the unit I worked in, it was 18 plus, so I didn't physically see it, but people that started contacting me shared with me their stories, and yes, there were a lot of children coming down with myocarditis, with enlarged hearts, with trouble breathing, all sorts of things, and were being severely hospitalized or they were dying. But then my friends, I have nurse friends all over now, MD Anderson, Texas Children's, Herman Memorial, they were telling me that the things they were seeing now, how bad it's screwing up these children's hearts and these kids that are just like passing over athletes. I mean, you'll see on the news all the time, athletes, young ones, just falling over with a severe heart attack. And this is not common. This is nothing that's ever happened before, but all my nurse friends can verify. And Ernest Ramirez is a good friend of mine. I'll never forget when he reached out to me because he wanted to get public, and he saw me and my lawyer on the news, and he reached out to ask like, hey, and I helped him get on news, and then he exploded from it. But he was devastated because he said, my government, my country, everybody lied to me, and because of it, I lost my only child. Like, I will never get him back. And what he's going, and I give him so much credit. And if you want him on your show, we'll get it done. But he's going everywhere. I mean, he even just sent me pictures yesterday on his SUV. He has this big sticker that says, Pfizer killed my son, and he will not stop until he gets justice and spreads the word around.
I think that we always direct the conversation towards the young, but the truth is, and we sort of forget about our elderly. And when that happened, the elderly in my neighborhood, they were so shell-shocked. I remember trying to go up and talk to them, and they were just run back in the house. They were petrified. They're already, in their later years. And if you look at the VAERS database where people can report vaccine injuries, it is largely elderly, and a lot of the deaths are elderly. So can you tell me a little bit about how the elderly were affected, some of the stories that you saw, some of the incidents you saw? How were the elderly affected by this?
Well, the sad thing is they tried to scare the elderly and they tried to scare the families, right? The whole thing was grandma and grandpa's going to die of COVID. Everybody needs to get vaccinated, stay away, alienate your family. Never in history did they tear families and friends apart so much. But let me tell you, all the time I worked in the COVID unit, a lot of that is BS. They made everyone think just because you were old or had comorbidities, you were going to catch COVID and you were going to die. And that wasn't the case at all. I mean, not even the least bit. I remember several patients, like for example, I had a 70-something-year-old woman with stage 4 lung cancer, right? She catch COVID, you would think she'd be dead in a second. She was fine. She was treated, she was good, she went home. I had another man like in his 60s, morbidly obese, right? Every diabetes, congestive heart failure, so many comorbidities. He had COVID, he was fine. I could go on like this forever. So the gist that they were trying to scare the elderly and anyone with comorbidities, that wasn't true, because that's not what you were seeing all the time. You were seeing just the opposite. It didn't just target them, and a lot of them were fine. So then, of course, they're scared. So all the grandmas and grandpas and elderly are taking the shot. Everybody else is taking it to try to protect them. But then more than anything, you'd see older people come down all of a sudden with sudden strokes, heart attacks from the blood clots. All of a sudden they have one in their leg, they have them in their lungs, and you get them in your lungs half the time you can't breathe, and it's almost sudden death unless you're at a hospital and can get to one quickly. So it blows your mind, and it's so sad what they did to these elderly people. They made them so scared. They literally spent years without seeing their grandchildren. And then if they died or something happened to them, that was it. Like you never had that last chance to see them.
Okay, are you familiar? I'm sure you're familiar with shedding.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question for you is the concept real? Can you explain it to the audience and tell us if it's legitimate?
It actually is. Now, I would rather have a doctor explain like the exact medical
just general
way around
description.
it, just general. So I've experienced it myself. So shedding can affect people differently. I have different friends.
But what is shedding?
Shedding is basically after you have the shot, especially like right after getting it within the first, it can last for a little while, but especially right after you get it in the first few days. Basically, if you're around a person and you're unvaccinated and you get around them, it can basically, you can get different symptoms and side effects from them. Anything from headaches to women can actually go into their menstrual cycle and have almost like hemorrhage-like experiences. And you get it from, and I don't want to go in the exact medical because I'd rather have a doctor do that. But and I've experienced it myself, and I don't want to get too gruesome, but I've had a patient that I was in very close proximity with, and they got the shot the day before, and I was with them for about 12 hours the very next couple of days. And let me tell you what affected me, and you're womanly, it was like nothing I had ever experienced in my life. It scared me. And I called the doctor immediately, and she's like, get on an aspirin, monitor it. There's not a lot of information because it happened early on, but it is a very real thing. Some people get different side effects. They'll get headaches. They'll feel different symptoms from it when they're around the vaccinated and they have never injected any kind of mRNA into themselves.
Does it go away? If you got vaccinated today, does it go away in 2 weeks, or are you always shedding?
To me, that's a little debatable because from my experience and what I've seen right up front, like right after you get it, it's the worst. And if someone's around you in close proximity for a length of time, a lot of times you will experience like a side effect from it. Now, I believe it does go away. Now, exactly when, I'm not sure. I've never done the science or done the proper research on that. So unlike them, I'm not going to give you false, research. But I believe it does go away With some people are more sensitive than others. I do have unvaccinated friends that are a lot more sensitive, and they can be around people even after they've had it months, a year later, and they get excruciating headaches. They feel very bad, and it's only when they're around them. So there is more sensitivity to it than others, but it is definitely a real thing.
Talking about misinformation, I talked about Dr. Jacqueline Minter leading the campaign to get the people of Fort Bend County vaccinated. And one of the things that she regularly would say is, she would advise people to go to quote unquote trusted sources, which translates into the corporate media.
Yeah.
The corporate media is funded by who? The pharmaceutical companies, right? And so at the same time, there were these other treatments out there, these other remedies, HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin. Okay, now, as I understand it, there are medical professionals in Houston that they went off the ranch, right, in a good way. They said, to heck with the establishment. They set up their own medical practices, and they began these other treatments that are not endorsed by the media. And they had tremendous success. Is this true?
100% true. And I've told you, I've done it myself. And I've seen the results. Even when I worked at Methodist in the COVID unit, when it first came out, they were actually giving COVID patients in Houston Methodist hydroxychloroquine. And within like a month or maybe 2 tops, they took it back real quick, right? And they stopped giving it. And we noticed it was working. And I even asked the doctor, I said, well, why'd they get rid of it? And she's like, I don't know. That was just their protocol. But then they jumped on board with remdesivir. And never in my history of nursing have I seen this. Remdesivir was so expensive. When it would arrive at a unit, you were not allowed to open and this is when it first came out, right? You were not allowed to even open the bag, even like administer it to a patient until they signed a consent and they agreed to do it, because you were not allowed to waste it because it was so many thousands of dollars. But hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, was extremely cheap at that time. It was like a few bucks. So, and then basically after Methodist, fired me, June of 2021, shortly after, within a few months, I went and worked for Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, who is very well known for her proper outpatient treatment. And I worked with her as one of her main nurses for about a year. We saw everybody who didn't want to go to the hospital or was scared to go and had heard about her came to her for proper outpatient treatment. I mean, we would get people show up at the door that couldn't even breathe. Their oxygen's like 60%. They would come to us and we would give them the proper treatment. A lot of times it was ivermectin, and people would sometimes ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or a combination, depending on what was going on. Sometimes within a day they would feel relief. But not only those, but we would do we would do IV azithromycin, high-dose steroids. We would do the proper breathing treatments, which the hospitals weren't giving them breathing treatments because they said it's a respiratory, but they were saying, oh, it would make it airborne, everybody would catch it. Well, guess what? I spent a whole year of my life, no mask, no N95, treating thousands of COVID patients up in their face, giving them the breathing treatments, the proper IV, high-dose vitamin C, which, oh my gosh, we had 100% success rate. Thousands and thousands. By now, couldn't even imagine the numbers. Nobody went to the hospital. Nobody died. If they needed oxygen, we would get them oxygen, and we would treat them every day until they got better. And normally it was a few days, maybe a week tops if they were bad. But I saw it with my own 2 eyes. But a sick thing too is now the pharmacies are trying to overrun doctors, and you would send in a prescription for ivermectin and they wouldn't fill it. They wouldn't fill it if it was anything COVID related. We had a list of pharmacies were the only ones that we knew they would fill it. Everybody else would tell us no.
What you're seeing is a scheme, a plan, where we are the guinea pigs to a profit motive. Hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, they wipe out the revenue models. They have no margins in it. They wipe out the revenue margins of the pharmaceuticals, of the hospital industries. As Jennifer said, the hospital industries, their numbers were sagging. They got a huge boost with this. They crunched the numbers. They made you the guinea pig, and they maxed out their margins. Dr. Mary Bowden, right? She sets up a practice for you, right? Where she removes the margin, the profit motive from it, and you get good results. And it's funny because here in Fort Bend County, we have a considerable Indian community, and India would export the ivermectin into America.
Yeah.
And so I was calling all of my Indian friends, and we got filled up with HCQ, I think, or ivermectin. I think it was ivermectin. So we were good, but that's essentially what it was. It was wiping out their profit motives. So last thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as I understand it, the intubating a patient, they were very aggressive with that procedure as well. They would apply it when it wasn't necessary, and that procedure, when they would intubate, it had a serious mortality rate.
It did. Once you intubated them, it had a very, very high mortality rate after that. And what was sick is there was even reportings of people that refused intubation, right? You can be a DNR, do not resuscitate. You can pick ahead of time what you want, what you don't want. There would be patients that would refuse intubation, and then all of a sudden they'd wake up and here they were intubated after they clearly stated and signed, no, I do not want to be intubated. And so they would freak out, they would panic, or their family would get upset, and it was like a fight. It was a battle. And my coders that have told me stories too, there were even times where it was like, okay, this person refused to get intubated, right? Well, after basically they would give him like a sedative, intubate him, only be intubated by maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, that's it. And then they would extubate, take it out. And even though it was that short little 10 minutes, 30 minutes, guess what? They could charge for a whole 24-hour. Because even if they did it a short window, they could charge for a whole 24-hour day of intubation. So you are racking up the money left and right, because not only is insurance paying it, but the government is incentivizing. And I'd have to look, because it's been a minute, but it was somewhere between $50,000, $70,000 to intubate a COVID patient.
I never want to be intubated.
Oh, me neither.
I mean, I can't imagine waking up with that. Your mouth is propped open. You have this cone shoved down your throat. You can't swallow. You barely can breathe. To me, that's a torture in itself. My mother, when she passed, she said, don't intubate me, just let me go. And they still wanted to intubate her. But yeah, I never want to be intubated. But again, right there again, every single thing this conversation is going back to is that we were the guinea pigs in their model. And what's very interesting is that you said that there were fights between families and medical professionals over the intubation. And you see once again, you see it's the establishment attempting to attain autonomy over your person, over who you are, over your own medical decisions. It's just it's funny because the county sheriffs, right, they would set up officers outside of the hospitals to make sure that, as security, right? But it's almost as if we need to have officers inside of the units to watch, to protect the patients from the medical professionals, is what it seems. And then intubation's one item, but what about remdesivir? As I understand that also
that became huge because that was their new protocol. You got COVID, you were on remdesivir for like 5 days, right? Families would refuse it. I personally know people that refused it and then woke up and guess what? It already went into their system. They did it regardless. And then what's really sad is I worked with a lot of different patients. They would even get lawyers. They would get court orders. The court would agree with them. The judge would sign on their behalf saying, okay, you don't have to get remdesivir. You can bring ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine in the hospital to give your loved one since the hospital won't do it. And guess what? They would have the court order show up to the hospital to help their family. And the hospitals would have police standing there not allowing them in. It was insane. Like, how can you legally do that? There's a court order, but they would not let him in the hospital. So then they'd fight, go back and forth. Well, guess what? By the time all the fighting and appealing's done, now that person's dead.
It's so inappropriate. They put our police in the middle of this thing. And I know the police officers didn't want to do it. But, again, what we see this conspiracy is what it was. We're not allowed to say the word for a reason, right? It's taboo to say the word conspiracy, because that's what it was. This Wuhan flu hits our shores in the most pivotal election year in mankind's history, and it is as if every medical professional is ready to go, every hospital, every government, the school boards, they're already have an action plan in place and ready to go to profit at the expense of your rights. Jennifer, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it. And I'd like to remind everybody, this weekend, the Republican Party, Freedom Matters Action Group, is having a primary debate for Republican candidates in the Republican primary in Fort Bend County. You can find that information at the Freedom Matters Action Group Facebook page. This is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Show. Thank you very much.